Boom! Welcome back to HLock Gaming. This week in Godforge episode 15.5. We got a big one for this half episode. But before I get to that, I'm going to do something I always forget to do till the end, which is one, mention the link/code down below if you want 10% off your Fateless and Godforge gear. And two, if you wouldn't mind giving this video a like and subscribing as I'm trying to get to 50 videos. All right, let's get to it. This week's podcast primarily about the beta. There's some other stuff in there. I'm not really going to cover that too much, so you might want to check it out for that. But yeah, let's get into the beta. All right, this week we got Brad hosting as usual, Sham, Simon, and their guest is Tim, or Ash as many of you know him. So the first thing they kind of talk about is how they were approaching this beta, and Simon actually says it'll probably be more like an alpha to them. Initially, though, they wanted to test, a bunch of different elements of the game. But then it sounds like Dan actually came up with, let's change this to a challenge beta. So it sounds like what they're going to do is it'll be a tower, and the contest will be how high can you get or low. They didn't really say if you're going to go up or down. They did mention that a few times, and they did kind of hint at that might have something to do with the lore and the story. So once we get closer and they announce what it is, maybe that'll give us a hint about the lore of the game itself. But the important thing about that is you can actually win stuff. Simon said you can win cosmetics, portraits, or skins are the examples he gave. He did say everyone who participates will get some type of participation pack. Shards is the example he gave. And then Sham said it'll really help you out when you're starting, so maybe some gold or some gear. We'll have to wait and see. I would say related to that, this has the potential to be actually pretty big. I know it's a mobile game, but if you think kind of maybe, in recent years, how big Pal World or Valheim's beta was, they kind of blew up. I can definitely see that happening. So they do have a wait list for the beta. So I don't know how many more people are going to get in or how many total are going to get in. They didn't really say. But I would say, okay, let me skip ahead too. They said part of the reason they're pushing back the beta is because they have to get these systems set up to kind of do this challenge so you can actually make an account, and whatever you get from that challenge will carry over because your heroes and that kind of stuff won't. Like, it's going to be a complete wipe, and you'll get some type of bonus stuff when you start the new game. Like I said, cosmetic, portraits, or skins, and then everyone who meets, he said X number days of play will get some type of pack. But if this really gets big, I can see a lot of people being interested in this and not being able to play it. And I don't know if they'd be able to do this, but I assume they would if they have it set up so you can create accounts. They could do something where you watch people on Twitch, and if you watch X number of hours, I don't know, you get like 3 shards when you start the game, or you get a starter skin. Right now it looks like we'll have one of 3 starters, and maybe you'll just have some type of voucher and it'll give you a different skin for one of those 3 vouchers. Just something for them to think about. All right, on to the tower. So they talked about they're going to switch it to that so it's really focused. It'll work sort of the same way like you're playing the game. Like Simon mentioned, you'll be able to grind certain levels for gear, certain levels for champs, so you can get their imprints to power up other champions. The interesting part he talked about was, when you get to a certain level, you'll hit a boss, right? If you want to compare it to Doom Tower, right? Every 10 levels, maybe something like that. But he said maybe, you defeat this boss and you go to Epic and it gets added to your team. Now, the part I was wondering about that is it going to be a set Epic? Is everyone going to get the same one, or is it going to be random? Almost like a shard pool. He didn't say. I have feelings about it both ways. One, if everyone essentially gets the same and you can farm the same champs, it really becomes about how well you can learn the mechanics. But on the other hand, they said they kind of got this idea from the Hell Hades free-to-play challenge, and randomness in champs definitely makes a huge difference in that. So part of me is like, man, let's just make it random. Let's just go for it. And if you get luck of the draw, you get luck of the draw, and maybe you're winning that thing. I will do my best. I don't know how well I'm going to do. I do okay in these games, but certainly people who make content full time are much better players than I am, I'd say, but I'll still give it a shot. Another thing they talked about, the reason they switched to this challenge is because if they kind of give it to you piecemeal, you get the first chapter or 3 of the campaign. Well, then they have to give you some of that story, and it could kind of spoil it for when they do the global launch. You'd see part of the story and you've seen it, 100 times already. It's going to kind of take away from that hype. So to eliminate that possibility where we kind of have to infer a few things from what we're playing seems pretty cool. So they'll still get the gameplay test, mechanics, probably stress test on their servers or something, but it will take away that element of wonder that we're going to get the first time we see the opening cutscene, the full thing, and then, the final boss, or not the final boss, and then, the first campaign boss you beat, like what part of the story does that reveal? It's going to take away some of that. But he did say related to that, by the end of May, they'll essentially have the heroes and the bosses they wanted finished. So we will see some bosses, we just won't see the story with it. But he did say part of the pushback too to put these systems in place to do this challenge will give their team to put a finer polish on what they do have done to make it even better. And Ash points out he thinks this is going to work well because you can learn the mechanics of the boss, not spoil the story, and then you can apply that once you get to the game release, but then you still have the story to be excited for. And again, Ash asked when, and I talked about this in my other video. Simon says end of June, early July, and the fact that he says early July, I'm really feeling that's probably what it's going to be now. The way he's talked about it in this video, they really want to put out a good quality demo or beta, whatever you want to call it. He thinks it's going to be more like an alpha. So I would not be surprised if early July is now when we actually see this alpha or beta. At one point, Simon also talks about how he's seen some videos where people are talking about the game already in a negative light. He didn't say this, but to me it's clearly obvious those people are trying to get views. But the reason I mention that is because they talk about feedback for the game, how they're going to get that. And they also talk about sort of, Brad's character creation. For example, they use, is this one common going to be great with this legendary, and is it going to break the game? Because they said they tested internally, but that's the kind of stuff they're going to find out in this beta. And I'm sure they're all thinking of the same example, which was Underpriest Brogni and Corpulent Cadaver for Clan Boss, that huge shield buildup. Are they going to have something like that? I also kind of wonder if they put little mini versions of that in there on purpose to see if we can find it. I bet they do. So we'll have to wait and see. But the reason that's all important is because they talk about feedback. And they said it will sort of be play metrics. Simon said if everyone is quitting on the same level of the tower and they still have energy left, we know, A, we didn't build it right and it's too hard to get past with what we gave them, or they're not enjoying it because of that, or just for another reason. So we have to kind of examine that. And then they talked about two written surveys, and even people who put, oh, I hate this, I hate that, etc. They did that because they like another part of the game so much they want it to succeed. So they said they're going to get stuff from both sides of it. And related to that, Tim asked them, so what if you essentially got, a mediocre or a bad response? And Sham explains that, well, we're going to have groups. We're going to have, let's say we have group 1, 2, 3. Let's say everyone in group 1 or a large majority of people in group 1 complain about X element in the game. So when that group ends, we're going to take the time to fix that. So when group 2 comes around, it'll be fixed or at least altered for that group, and then we'll kind of, see how they feel about it, if that's a complaint point again, or if they've moved on to something else. So another way they're going to get sort of more out of the beta than if everyone just played part of the campaign and had part of the forging system, etc., more focused to give them better feedback, it sounds like. They also did say that they regularly play the build every day. And even before the beta, Simon mentioned maybe we'll send this out to, 50 people we trust. And I'm thinking that could be, people like Tim or, people who work for Hell Hades. hellhades.com or the Hell Hades Network, whatever you want to call it, who aren't strictly covering this. So maybe a guy like Nubs, or we know Scratch actually has a channel now. So they'd probably get people like that. They've had Deadwood on here, so maybe a guy like that, people with experience, or maybe some of the bigger people who are regularly covering it now that we see in the community. So we'll have to wait and see if that happens. That could be pretty cool as well. And then at the end, something interesting. Again, what's your favorite champs? That thing, etc. Tim has been on here a few times, so he's already said that. But he said in general, he likes darker kind of gothic champions. Sham and Simon both kind of smile and say, "Oh, there's some stuff coming through." And Tim did try and get him to show us what it was, but he didn't. But it sounds like they showed him after the podcast. But then also, Brad said, well, maybe that'll be on next week's leak video on Tuesday. So I guess we'll wait and see. So those are my takeaways on the important stuff from the podcast and about the beta. This has been HLock. Thanks for watching. Bye.